What's going on? All thanks for tuning in once again. Let's recap Opetaia versus Square. What a dominant performance. What a dominant finish. Opetaia, far too good for Square. As I mentioned, Square came in a lot lighter than I thought in this fight. I thought that he'll be a bit heavier, but in this fight, he comes lighter. And Opetaia just looked a lot bigger than Square. Square was unable to come forward. Opetaia was basically able to do whatever he wanted, jump in and out of the pocket, beat him to the punch. I mentioned that Square would be throwing wide shots, in the breakdown, and Opetaia would catch him, and that's exactly what he done, Gets him to a corner. Opetaia lands a straight left, and then it's quick enough to land a right hand, before Square's one. Square is a guy that, like I mentioned, likes to throw wide shots, and Opetaia far too quick, far too strong, far too experienced, just on a different level completely, So Square, gets his first defeat. Opetaia is looking to fight Ramirez. And I hope that fight happens. Opetaia really hasn't been able to get these big fights. Square, no one really knew who he was, although he's undefeated. I can understand that Opetaia wants a voluntary defense, but again, just completely different levels. So where to from here for Opetaia? I think that he will fight Ramirez. Ramirez has a fight coming up shortly, and I'm hoping that Turkey makes that fight happen. We have seen Opetaia fight in Saudi before. We've seen him on a big card before. Now he's basically main event. So I'm hoping that he gets a chance to be a main event, one of these Saudi cards. Unification cruiserweight, title fight will be, unification fight will be great for him. There's no real other fights for him, besides Jack. He's got the WBC strap. So Opetaia, just far too good for Square, and just on a completely different level. So I'm hoping that he gets the bigger fights, moving forward. Ramirez, Jack, and then possibly even Usyk. That's the fight that I want to see. I mentioned it before. Usyk versus Opetaia. That's a fight that I want to see at cruiserweight. Pending that Opetaia is able to become undisputed. And that's what he's chasing. He wants to be undisputed at cruiserweight. So I don't see him going up in weight, if they do want to make the Usyk fight happen. I do see Usyk winning that fight if he beats Dubai. If the Fury fight's not there, he's got nothing to prove really against either Fury or AJ. I know that Caballero's in the mix. People want to see that fight as well. So hopefully we do see some big fights in the near future. And hopefully Opetaia gets bigger names. This was a complete mismatch. Opetaia could have done what he wanted really with Square. Square didn't really hurt him. He only had 50% knockout ratio, just over 50, I believe. Opetaia 77 or something like that. Close to 80. Definitely a great finisher, Opetaia. And I'm hoping that it's not one of those fighters where people just want to see the KO. We saw that with Tank. We see that with Tank today, is where people just show up for the KO. Doesn't really matter who he fights. I'm hoping that his management team really line him up with all the big names. And I think that Turkey's a good guy that can make that happen for him. If these guys don't want to fight him, I think that Turkey can make the big fights for Jai. He needs a big fight soon. Good on him for staying busy. We can see how great he is, but in this fight he just wasn't tested at all. I still watched it. Don't get me wrong, I'm a Opetaia fan. I wanted to see the knockout. I was expecting him to finish him off earlier, you know, if I'm honest, perfectly honest. You know, I mentioned in the breakdown round 3. And I believe he could have done that if he wanted to. You know, he had full control of this fight. And the power was in both hands for Jai. You know, he lands the straight left and then breaks the jaw with the right. So, I mean, overall great performance from Opetaia. You know, he's got to stay busy like what he's doing. It's good that he didn't just not fight anybody, you know, so hopefully we do see the Ramirez fight next. Leave your take on it. What do you think? Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.